Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the third one in the row of challenges and solutions for TSOs, presenting the German experience. Right now, I also would like to thank the organizers, GIZ, USAID, and Energynautics, for inviting me and for giving me the possibility to present the German experiences here. And yeah, I would like to use the first of my valuable 20 minutes for a small advertising block. 50 Hertz founded a consulting company a few years ago. Elia Grid International is it named, and we have international projects also in, let's say, Southeast Asia on all topics around renewable grid integration. For example, grid code or writing grid codes, reviewing grid codes, strategic grid development, and other topics. And yeah, I just wanted to mention, if you're interested, you can contact me or my colleague Lea Große-Vorholt, which is responsible here. Yeah. But now I would like to come to the subject of the main subject of the presentation here, and would like to introduce our system shortly, and also the German Energiewende. We have heard a lot in the presentation this morning of Thomas Ackermann on the German Energiewende. So even I've seen that one graph is the same as in one of my slides. I will not add very much on this, but I will just briefly give you an overview of 50 Hertz, of the company. We're a private company owned and transmission system operator, so we're owner of the assets and operator, system operator here. We're owned by an infrastructure fund as well as the Belgian grid operator here. We're unbundled. We have a fully or relatively advanced unbundling in place in Germany, and you can see here on the German map we have 4 TSOs in Germany, so it's not only one, but 4 TSOs, and we're responsible for the eastern part of Germany, and we are part of the integrated and synchronous European electricity system. The synchronous European system stretches from the southwestern part, from Portugal to Poland and Romania, Bulgaria. So the islands, Great Britain, Ireland, and Scandinavia are not part of the synchronous area, but it's a really large area here. Some key figures. I think the length of the lines is not so important, but maximum load, 16 gigawatt in our area, power consumption around 100 terawatt hours. And when you look at the installed capacity, 51 gigawatts, you see that we are exporting transmission zone here, or control zone, and you can see renewables, 28 gigawatts. When the maximum load is 16 gigawatt, you can see that it's a normal situation at 50 Hertz transmission system that we have a so-called negatively vertical grid load. So the consumption in our control area is lower than the production, and we are responsible for, let's say, transporting all the renewable generation to other parts where the load is in the system. And when you compare the rest generation with the power consumption, you come to this number of nearly 50%. So we've seen the figures for Germany, which are below the Danish values. When you only look at 50 Hertz, we're having, let's say, a fierce competition with Denmark for the highest figure here. Turnaround, around 1.3 billion in the grid. 10 billion the whole company. This is because in Germany the TSOs are at least partly responsible for selling renewables at the market. And this creates or blows up the balancing sheet, our balancing sheet also. Yeah, the greenhouse gas emissions in Germany, let's say the main driver of the renewable development. Don't want to go too much in detail. We're in a discussion about what sectors will have what amount of CO2 emissions available in the future, especially in the 2030 targets, which are being decided on right now. And the goal for 2050 you've already heard this morning, and also this slide you have already seen. So there's just one point I would like to add to this development, or to what Thomas Ackermann said on this slide, that when you look at all those dots the dots on the map, more than 95% of all those power plants or power generation devices are installed in the distribution grid. So they're not installed directly in the transmission grid. And this creates a lot of challenges. I will come back to this later, but the communication between TSOs and DSOs, for example, is one point where we're currently discussing a lot and have been discussing in the past years. So it is necessary that the TSO as system operator knows about the status of the renewable generation, but if they're connected to the distribution grid, this requires a lot of data exchange. Yeah, also the load curves and generation curves have been we have looked at, so I think I will skip this slide and come to the points when I prepared the presentation here, saw as main points and key issues in integrating renewables. The first point is synchronizing the extension of renewable generation with necessary grid extension. Second is responsibilities and rights for renewables, so grid codes. Third point is balancing. I think I will go more in detail on this topic. And last one is congestion management, which is especially important for us currently in Germany, but where I'm convinced that this is also one key task and important for every other system operator who wants to integrate large shares of variable renewables, where we'll come to. Yeah, first point, to synchronize grid extension and the extension of renewable control. Here you can see on the slide first the development of renewables, especially PV and wind over the past years. And I think most of you probably know that we had a feed-in tariff system in place in Germany, and so the feed-in tariffs were set by regulation or by the government and created incentives to invest in renewables. And we've seen for some years that those incentives have been too high in a way that it led to a really, really dynamic development, especially of PV. In the years 2009, 10, and 11, we installed 7 gigawatts every year for 3 consecutive years. And in total, you can say that the renewables development was so fast that the grid development couldn't follow. There were many points, or let's say many reasons why this happens. One point was also, which was also addressed this morning. I found it very interesting to see again in the presentation of Thomas Ackermann what Angela Merkel said with regard to the renewables goals we had in the past. And if you see that even if the goals are written in the law, I think there were always numbers and figures in the law for renewable, for new investment in renewables. But if you see that even if the chancellor don't believes in it, then it's difficult to, let's say, make investment in grids based on the goals while you don't know whether it will really come true. The goals will really come true. So this is, I think, one reason why we got lagged behind with grid extension. Another reason is that we are facing issues of acceptance when we want to extend the grid, which are not so easy to overcome, or which just take times here. And when we look at the point, how can we address these issues? How can we find solutions? Then I think one key takeaway should be there is a need for volume control and for stable and reliable goals of renewables. And the second point is what we have seen in the development of the law, of the renewable promotion law in Germany, that you also need at least a rough view and a rough framework on where the renewables will occur in the grid, where the investment will be made. So the regional component, because when we're talking about need for grid extension, obviously it matters if whether the renewables are located in the north or in the south of the country. So you can see here a map of Germany, and you can see the, let's say, the reasons for the congestion. We see we have invested in especially wind generation in the north of Germany. The load is mainly located in the south of Germany, and so this was not foreseen some years ago. Let's say, when I go back to this slide, a third point, third solution or third takeaway we've seen here is that it always makes sense to implement market mechanisms. So it's just a relatively recently made experience, because we introduced with the most recent amendment of the renewables law, we introduced tenders in the renewables, and we switched from feed-in premium, what we had before, after the feed-in tariff. We're now switching to a tendering system, and we see currently, it's only recent experiences. We had, let's say, some 3 or 4 tenders so far, but that the prices and the level of subsidy has decreased significantly. So it really decreased sometimes by 50%, which is a result no one expected in Germany. Not even the government expected this result, and which shows that if there is competition, then there's a lot of innovation being mobilized, which leads to reducing costs. So the most extreme example here of those tenders was one tender on offshore farms, which had the result that there were 2 participants bidding a price of 0. So they want to build the farm without any subsidy, or only the grid connection as a subsidy, let's say, which has some special reasons also, perhaps, of the design of the tenders, but it shows the potential of cost reductions when you introduce market mechanisms. And I will come back to this later on. Second point, responsibilities of renewables. We have talked about the grid codes. I think many of the speakers of this morning have been talking about the need for relevant grid codes here and for adapting the grid codes. And Thomas Ackermann also presented already the example I have on my slide with a 50.2 hertz problematic we faced in Germany, was really something you can take away, an error we made. But let's say if you try to look at this from a point, how can we avoid making such mistakes in the future again, then from my perspective, it's mainly a question of processes and of stakeholder engagement. So writing grid codes has been a mainly technical issue. So there were technicians who wrote really detailed rules for the grids, and it was not really relevant for politics. But if politics now changes the transmission system by setting goals for renewables and changes this, then obviously the policy and the relevant stakeholders have to be engaged in this grid code review process, and have to have a look if the relevant grid codes are also valid still with higher shares of renewables, or when you go forward to a system with higher shares of renewables. And therefore, it's necessary that the politicians understand what is written there. That's also a necessary step, which takes some time, because we're talking about very technical issues here, of course. Okay, another point, ancillary services from RES has also already been addressed. From our point of view as 50 Hertz, it's not mainly a question of the grid codes, but of facilitating market participation of the renewables. So when we look at the balancing mechanism in Germany, for example, we see that we have a market there. So primary, secondary, and tertiary reserve are designed as a market. The TSO demands or creates a demand for those reserves, and all generators or even a demand side response can participate in this market. And if you make the market design right, then you create incentives for renewables to participate here, and so also you incentivize technological development and investment of the plant operators and the plant owners into, for example, more flexibility, more controllability, communication, and so on. Okay, then I would like to come to the balancing issue, and as we have been talking very much this morning also about the balancing issues, I would like to focus on the frequency control balancing, which is the two boxes below. Let's say the first box, the upper box, balancing day to hourly. RES volatility is more a question of backup power plants. We have addressed this a little bit already, but let's say it's a difficult question, and it's a long-term question, only relevant for if you really have high shares of renewables and the conventional power plants are being phased out. But if you talk about hourly and minutely and secondly balancing, then it's a question of frequency stability, and I think everyone would agree that it's the key issue or the key solution here is to put the right incentives in place. And therefore, I would like to present shortly, I haven't prepared this on the slides, but I'd like to present shortly on the system we have in place in Germany here. We have basically not such an obligation, what we've seen or what we've heard about the Indian system here, that 15% deviation is okay, is still in the range. But we say in Germany we have zero tolerance, so that's the first principle. And we don't have the principle of penalizing deviations, so for example forecast deviations or load forecast deviations. But we say the generator which has the deviation has to bear the consequences. That might be a penalty. So, for example, if the system is short and you are also short because your wind generation profile is lower than forecasted, you're being penalized. You have to pay the costs, the consequences, the costs of the necessary power plants which have to be activated by the TSO. On the other side, it might also happen that you have your deviation is the other way around. You have too much wind feed-in with your wind farm, and at the same point in time, there's a power plant failure. So a large block runs out of the system, and so there's a lack of power, and at the same time, you have a deviation to the upper side. So you have too much power at a wind farm. Then you're not being penalized because it's something which helps the system, but you rather get paid for your deviation. So that's the system we have in place, which nevertheless creates huge and large incentives to provide good forecasts to the operators, to the plant operators. And so usually they use not only one forecast, but 2 or 3 forecasts. And we as 50 Hertz for our portfolio also use 3 forecasts, different forecasts. Let's say in case one is not available or one is obviously bad, then you can use the other ones. Yeah, and it creates also and mobilizes a lot of innovation on the forecasting side. So we have, I don't know, about 50 companies in Germany right now which are offering services for forecasting renewables here. Yeah, and if there's this incentive for balancing, this also leads to the fact that there is a need for an intraday market. So we also talked about real-time markets and day-ahead markets so far. The intraday market is in between both. And if you see as a wind farm, your forecast has been too high, for example, so you expect a lower generation, you need to find a counterpart. You need to find some flexibility which is available in the market, usually conventional power plants, which can ramp up or ramp down their power output in a short period of time. And this creates also incentives for the power plants to invest in their flexibility. We've heard about those, let's say, as I understood, regulatory defined values of 55% minimum output of coal-fired power plants. That's really, really difficult, or it is impossible indeed from my perspective for a regulator or someone who's not owning the plant to calculate this value right. If you have a market, the plant operator itself can decide on whether it makes sense to make the power plant more flexible and reduce minimum output or not. We have seen, for example, one coal-fired power plant in Germany. It has a capacity of 160 megawatts and is located in the western part of Germany. And they told me they have a minimum capacity, minimum generation of 8 megawatt. So it's 5% of the capacity. You would never expect this to be the economic solution. But the plant operator was convinced that giving the market conditions in the intraday market, giving the opportunities to earn some money, or let's say to avoid losses, he had the economic incentives to make this power plant that flexible here. Okay, perhaps, let's say one sentence also to the need for batteries. We have also heard this topic already, but when you have the market, then you have also a competition between different technologies. So there are flexible power plants, and there might be also flexible storage devices. So battery storage is one of the flexibility options. If this option is in the money, if it provides the service for adequate costs and is competitive with other flexibility sources, then it obviously makes sense to invest in battery storages. But if this is not the case, there's no need for, let's say, a special subsidy for battery storages here. Okay, so now I'm also running out of time. Just one example here on one challenging grid situation we faced at 50 Hertz in August 2016 was a really short-term or ultra-short-term volatility we've seen here, because you can see here different on the slide on the graph on the left, different forecasts, and the closer you're to real time, the better the forecast. But we've seen at this situation that even 2 hours before real time, the forecast was relatively bad. So the deviation from the 2 hour before real time forecast and the real time values were still very high, and can be seen on the right hand side here. This creates need for balancing, which has to be covered by TSO assets here, which can also be procured in a market, as I mentioned here. Another solution on this side we worked on and we worked out also as 50 Hertz is a cooperation of different grid operators, regional cooperation. We've also heard about this. It's, let's say, sometimes not an easy issue, but we've seen here that from a technical point of view, it absolutely makes sense. And what we have in place is a grid control cooperation on a national basis. So the 4 TSOs cooperate very closely, but also on an international cooperation. And on the international cooperation, we have especially the task of avoiding counter-activation. So if we have an oversupply in Germany and in the Czech Republic or in Belgium, or Netherlands, there's an undersupply. It doesn't make sense that we activate additional power plants and the Czech operator reduces the output of some power plants. It makes sense that we transfer energy from one control area to the other control area as far as the grid resources are available. And this is in place. We call it IGCC, International Grid Control Cooperation, is in place and expanding more and more over more or less whole Europe, and already saved some $300 million US over the past 3 years since it's in place here. Last point, congestion management. I think I'm more or less run out of time. Congestion management is a really complex topic. That's what this slide wants to show, and there's a huge need for efficient congestion management. And in Germany, we see this as efficient redispatch need. So we need, as a TSO, we need to have control over the power plants in case we face congestion in the grid. Therefore, we invested a lot in updating our processes, having a look at which flexibility sources are available at which time frame, and creating processes which also can't be only national processes, but which must be international processes, where we talk also and exchange data, a lot of data, with our neighboring TSOs, neighboring countries, in order to manage the congestion in the grid and to redispatch power plants if necessary. Okay, then I come to a short conclusion. So the RES support should follow a transparent volume path so that the grid extension can follow also in time, and there's no delay here. The TSO needs sufficient transparency and online data also for the renewables devices, even if they are connected to the distribution grid. In Germany, this is solved by the digitalization law. So by installing smart meters to the renewable devices, the data will be available also for the TSO. So far, it is not. RES should participate actively in the market. There should be market-based incentives on the energy market, intraday market, and in ancillary services. And other choices about how to manage congestions, how to arrange bidding zones. There's always, let's say, a specific solution necessary. There's no best solution or what we can recommend here. Thank you very much.